Wall Street's top cop, Preet Bharara. He is U.S. Attorney for the Southern District of New York.
It occurs to me that this is what it must feel like to be a Kardashian. And you're probably wondering that if I were a Kardashian, which Kardashian would I be? Obviously, I would be Kanye.
Rajaratnam found guilty on 14 counts.
Poster child for Wall Street greed, Rajat Gupta, 1 count of conspiracy, 5 counts of securities fraud.
I just wanted to apologize in advance that I don't have enough subpoenas for all of you.
That may have been a joke, but the so-called sheriff of Wall Street is continuing his war on insider trading.
Matthew Martoma being arraigned. This is the most lucrative insider trading case ever.
Michael Steinberg arrested on insider trading charges.
We're not afraid of bringing any kind of case against anyone, no matter how big they are, how wealthy they are, or how prominent they are.
Well, there's a video for you. Okay. Let's get right to it. Preet. CEO just gets a call, has to come see you, worried about insider trading. You've told him, listen, come in. Is it good for that CEO to start by making a joke and say, hey, Kanye? Or what would be the best way to make it so that you might think that he shouldn't be indicted?
I'm glad you always begin slowly, Jim. First of all, I don't make that call. I have people who make the call. Depending on what you have done, and depending on, and given the track record that we have, if your CEO gets contacted by our office, you might want to figure out if that's a good time to check whether or not you have an extra pair of underwear, because of the seriousness with which we take our work. And obviously, I'm kidding, but
I don't know if you are. I've been reading the stories. You need smelling salts if you knock on if you knock on the door.
We're not regulators. We don't bring. Sometimes we do, but generally speaking, when we're talking about criminal prosecutors reaching out, we're talking about a criminal action. And by the time we have made contact and we've decided to go overt with respect to an individual or an institution, it's probably pretty bad news. And we only do that in very serious circumstances. And it's not a laughing matter. It's not a joking matter. And people who run, whether it's a hedge fund or a bank or some other kind of financial institution or a company that makes any product, needs to take it very seriously. And the most important thing you can think about doing at that moment is to think about how forthcoming you should be and to cooperate, because the history is that those who come forward and are voluntary with information, volunteer information, do better than those who don't. And more importantly, for hopefully the people who are in the audience here today and people who are watching on television, is to think to yourself, what are the things you should have been doing and asking yourself and thinking about in the years leading up to that phone call, because you want to avoid getting that phone call in the first place.
Okay, we can't really directly talk about SAC Capital, I know, but talk about phone calls. Are the phone calls too late? My understanding from the conventional press is that if you're going to bring some of these cases, the statute of limitations is up. And look, if you better do it this afternoon or it's over.
I'm not going to talk about any particular case, not about the institution you mentioned or any other institution that people are thinking about. The other thing to keep in mind is, a lot of people think that they know what we're investigating and what's up our sleeve, and most of the time they don't. And there are a lot of institutions that we're looking at, and people have no idea that we're looking at them, because as a general matter, we don't talk about our cases, we don't talk about our investigations, because it's not appropriate to do so. What I'll say as a general matter, there are a lot of, and it's entertaining, there are a lot of armchair lawyers and armchair prosecutors who think that they know what the legal theories are that we can pursue, and think they know what the statute of limitations issues are, and think they know what the strictures are, and often they're quite wrong. Just to give you a couple of examples, a lot of people talk about statutes of limitations being limited to 5 years in particular cases. The bank fraud statute has a statute of limitations of 10 years. If you're talking about wire fraud or mail fraud, it's typically 5 years, but if it affects a financial institution, it's 10 years. When you're talking about ongoing activity and ongoing misconduct on a conspiracy theory that elongates the statute of limitations, what people have not appreciated as much as I can tell from reading the press, Dodd-Frank, which was enacted 3 years ago today, I believe, enlarged the securities fraud statute of limitations from 5 years to 6 years. So, we have a lot of legal theories that we can pursue. We don't talk about those generally, but I think a lot of the armchair prosecutors who sit around and speculate about the cases that we're going to bring and the ways in which we're going to bring them are often fairly wrong.
All right, let me understand. In other words, there are cases in the press right now which time and again we have told, you're almost done, you're out of time. That's not the case. You can bring cases for multiple years from now.
All I'm saying is that depending on the circumstances of the case and what the facts are and the legal theories, that stark statements by armchair prosecutors in the press are often incorrect.
All right, fair enough, because I think that that is exactly the opposite of the perception of what most people in this room feel. Don't rest if you did something 5 years ago.
Well, you should never. People shouldn't rest. People shouldn't be waiting for, you know, time to run out. That's not a good way to behave. And when, I mean, right? So, you know.
All right, fair enough. All right,
I don't even wear a watch, actually, just for the record.
Timeless. Yes. All right, timeless indictments. 3 senators last week introduced a version of Glass-Steagall. They want to break up the banks. Why? Because they think banks are too big to fail. More importantly, they think the bank CEOs are too big to jail. Did Arthur Andersen's shutdown take that away from you, or can you indict individuals and large banks, including ones that have done multiple instances of violations?
I don't think anyone is too big to indict. No one is too big to jail. I think, and I've been saying this for years, you know, there's enough moral hazard in the industry, and if you give people a blank check and you tell people that they have a get-out-of-jail-free card because of their size or because of their interconnectedness to the economy, as an absolute matter, that's a very dangerous thing, and we should never do it, and we don't do it, and we don't believe that, and I try to say as often as I can that that is not the case. That said, you have to be mindful of collateral consequences, and it may be the case that if you have a gigantic institution, whether you make toys or you know, you're a financial institution and you have 100,000 innocent employees and you make a good product and there's one bad guy at the company, we actually have a legal basis to indict the company. But depending on the industry, if that is, you know, an institution that will go out of business and you'll unemploy 100,000 people and shareholders will lose billions of dollars in value and the economy will be disrupted, you have to take that into account.
Even if they're guilty as hell?
I said you have to take that into account. And if you're talking about an individual at a 100,000 person company, that's one thing. If you're talking about you know, an analysis of the factors that we are required to take into account under Department of Justice guidelines, including the pervasiveness of the conduct, whether or not they are first offenders, whether or not they have learned lessons from the past, whether or not they have cooperated fully, whether or not they've taken measures to improve themselves, all those things you take into account. But I will tell you that you will, I think, see, and we are thinking about, and I hope people appreciate that we are thinking about, bringing, you know, holding institutions accountable, not just individuals accountable, because that's what sends a message of deterrence. And you can, on the one hand, it's perfectly appropriate to say the particular bad guys who commit crimes in an institution should be held accountable and should go to jail if that's appropriate. But at the same time, I think people need to understand that there are appropriate circumstances in which institutions are blameworthy also, because they either looked the other way, or they encouraged malfeasance, or they didn't stop malfeasance, or they have allowed malfeasance to happen time and time again, and they get a slap on the wrist, and they pay a penalty, and they don't have to plead guilty, and that's not always correct.
So you could look at what the SEC is doing, and you could say, you know what? I've had it. That's 3 strikes. You're out. I'm going in.
All I'm saying is, if you're an institution that has on multiple occasions committed misconduct, and the first time you get a fine, the second time you get a fine, and the third time you get a fine, at some point you have to be held responsible in a more serious way. Otherwise, you don't get the message. And when, you know, institutions are making you know, unheard of profits from before, in order to have a deterrent effect, in order for people to understand that there is some pain that's involved in committing crime and allowing crime to be committed, and you don't learn from those lessons, there has to be, you know, some extraction of penalty there, and that's often going to be, going forward, I think, a criminal penalty.
All right, well, Jamie Dimon said to me last week after they reported the quarter at J.P. Morgan that there were individual bankers who were bad actors, and he was surprised they weren't prosecuted, that they weren't punished. Now, you got the statute. You just gave us a word on the statute of limitations. The incidents that occurred in 2007, 2008 are fair game. Some of these execs at banks, should they fear what you're doing right now in your office?
Yes.
They should.
No, look, people should be fearful of bad conduct that they've committed catching up with them. People should have a healthy respect and fear of the law, because that's what causes deterrence. And if you have done bad things and you're just looking at the clock to see if you're safe and you're going to have repose at the stroke of midnight on a particular day, that's not a good way to conduct yourself. And yeah, people should be afraid that bad acts that they've committed in the past are going to catch up with them.
You talked about your office calling in people, not necessarily you. Are there people in this room who would be shocked at some of the names, some of the people who have been getting in the back door lately from big banks that did things 4 or 5 years ago where everyone here probably thinks they're scot-free because they thought the statute of limitations made it so you couldn't bring them?
First of all, no one goes through the back door. Everyone comes through the front door. I don't. You know, they might be. I don't know how much people are reading.
Well, I mean, you had a suitcase of subpoenas last year. You said you had. I mean, where's the suitcase? No subpoenas this year?
Yeah, I had a lot of subpoenas actually, and on the way over here, I ran into like 6 corrupt politicians. So I ran out.
All right, let's talk about behavior change. I know that corrupt politicians are the same, but it seems like to me that there are fewer tips. Or perhaps people are using better technology. My daughter and I Snapchat, okay, disappears in 3 seconds. Can the bad guy Snapchat go buy Leap Wireless at 3:45 on Friday and get away with it because you don't have the technology to stop it?
I don't even know what you're talking about. Have your daughter call me.
It's a technology that allows the message to disappear in 3 seconds and supposed to be untrackable.
Yeah, look. I always learn when I come on this.
Okay,
show.
Fair enough. Use Snapchat.
There's technology. Look, to answer it a different way, technology is a big deal, and you know, insider trading is a crime of communication, and other crimes are often facilitated by communication, and law enforcement is always trying to take, you know, the lead and always trying to stay a step ahead of the bad guys, and to the extent people can figure out ways to communicate either by, you know, IM or Snapchat or some other method, you know, law enforcement needs to think about that. And one of the reasons why we engaged, you know, my predecessors decided and we continued and defended the use of wiretaps in insider trading cases for exactly that reason, because it becomes too easy for people to get away with their crimes, and we need to be thinking about those things. But nobody should feel safe because they're using a particular method of communication, because separate and apart from all of those issues, I'm not sure that you would flip on your daughter or vice versa, but we have case after case where there was not wiretapping involved. But human beings are human beings, and if we get evidence against a particular person, people have to be worried not only that the government is listening in real time, but they have to be worried that their counterparty in the crime, their partner in crime, will come to the government and reveal all the criminal activity that you've discussed and that you've engaged in, and then you can be prosecuted for that as well. So nobody should feel comfortable, no matter what method of communication they are using.
Okay,